But, let's get back to the discussion of policy that was brought up in that speech from Donald Trump once he took his oath of office. Lori, I was talking to Rob about the promise to declare the U.S. southern border, declare it an emergency. When you hear that, what does that tweak in your mind as to what we might see along the U.S.-Mexico border now?
Well, this is it. I mean, this is no surprise to hear President Trump say that he's going to go this route of declaring an emergency around the southern border and the immigration situation. He's been talking about that a long time. But at one point he was, and this is, I think, a big part of what triggered some of our response in Canada, it's not just the tariffs, is that he was also talking about issues at the northern border and talking about the flow of fentanyl and the drug situation. And it was almost like he was putting the northern and southern U.S. borders in the same category and potentially having this tariff response. And so today we didn't hear anything about Canada from President Trump, at least not yet. But we hear that as far as the southern border is concerned, he's thinking about these significant measures around identifying drug cartels as foreign terrorists, taking away the birthright, citizenship birthright for people who are born in the U.S., which would affect, of course, people who are born to parents who are in the U.S. illegally, no asylum at the U.S. border. And these things, I think, he's saying these things, his supporters are cheering. There's a lot of agreement across the U.S. that there is a massive problem in terms of the immigration system and the security at the southern border. But some of the measures that he's proposing, I have to think, are going to be challenged in court. Like changing that aspect of the entitlement to American citizenship, changing the asylum situation at the border. There are challenges to those things. And so it'll be interesting to see how he progresses in these sorts of goals. It'll also be interesting to see what he says about the northern border when he does, and I don't want to tempt fate here, but when he does turn his attention to Canada, what he's going to be saying and whether the measures we've taken are going to be enough.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And Rob, as we talk about border issues, what is without a doubt, once these policies come through from Donald Trump, once you see a crackdown on the southern border, and with it the promise to deport millions of illegal migrants within the United States, that will have an impact here in Canada. What are you hearing about how Canadian officials are preparing for that? How prepared are they for such an eventuality?
Well, I think they've been preparing for some time and in secret for this kind of an event, not necessarily tied to Donald Trump. I remember speaking to a very senior person in the Canadian Armed Forces, and I asked him for an example of the kind of thing that kept him up at night. And he said that one of the things that they were preparing for was a massive arrival of irregular migrants at the Canadian border due to, for instance, a climate change event, and how that would represent not just a humanitarian challenge, but a security challenge as well. So we know that the institutions in the Canadian government have prepared for them for a long, long time, but preparing for them and actually carrying through something like this are entirely different matters. For instance, Chicago is a proximate city to Canada. It's not that far. It's a day's drive. Millions and millions of people there. It's clearly, like Los Angeles, like New York City, cities that they call them sanctuary cities, but as far as the people around Trump are concerned, those are democratically run cities. Those cities are going to be targeted. And we've seen this done in Texas, where the Republican governor has put irregular migrants on buses and sent them to Democratic cities. So those people are going to be targeted in those cities, and that's when we'll see whether or not we are going to have this inflow of people. And again, why is Mr. Trump doing this? If he does go through with it, you've got to wonder, you've got to ask yourself, if a lot of this isn't due to the opprobrium with which he views Justin Trudeau. Would he be doing this if a Conservative were in office? We don't know, but it's clear that he has particular bitterness towards Mr. Trudeau. I'm actually quite surprised that the tariff threat wasn't followed through immediately because of this. And it'll be interesting to see if that tariff threat, if that immigration threat endures beyond the Trudeau regime.
Well, I also wonder if the very fact that we haven't heard about the tariffs today, the 25% tariff, was because the promise on social media was that it was going to be across the board 25%. But at the same time, in that speech, in addition to declaring the U.S. southern border as an emergency, he also wants to declare an emergency when it comes to national energy. And of course, more than 50% of the oil the United States consumes and buys is from Canada. So where does that figure into what you heard today, Rob?
Well, as I said, the Canadian argument all along in the last couple of months has been, why would you do this? Your goal is to project a stronger U.S. Abroad. You can do that with petroleum. The United States is already the biggest exporter of oil in the world, but you could be even stronger by supplanting what you're getting, what you're using at home with Canadian oil. So maybe that argument is bearing fruit. Look, the other argument that Canadian officials have made is if you actually go through with this and we have to put a tariff on oil, U.S. drivers in the Midwest and in the South are going to be paying 75 cents more a gallon. There isn't a president that could withstand that. Mr. Trump, even with his formidable popularity on day one of his presidency, would be browbeaten if he decided to do something like that. So Canada is not bereft of cards to play in this discussion. It appears, for now anyway, like they played the energy card relatively well. We'll see. We'll see. Because even if we did put that tariff on, it would take a long time for all of this to come into effect. I don't know that we're going to get to that point, but it appears that our warnings, the ringing of the energy bell, actually did have some effect, and perhaps Danielle Smith's efforts in terms of lobbying for more Alberta energy might have had some impact as well.
You know, Lori, what do you say to that? Because the other thing that came to my mind as they talked about declaring an energy emergency. We know that one of the first acts that Joe Biden did as president was cancel the Keystone XL pipeline, where we're now hearing Donald Trump that what he wants to do, and this is his words, is drill, baby, drill. So what does that mean for a project like Keystone XL? Where does Canada fit into that?
Right. I mean, of course, at this point, we're thinking about all the ways in which the Canada-U.S. relationship could be disrupted because of the second term of Donald Trump, what the inauguration means, what sorts of decisions he's going to make that would be economically catastrophic for Canada. But there also could be opportunities for partnerships. There could be opportunities for growth. I mean, I'm sure Danielle Smith loves to hear the sound of drill, baby, drill. That's what she's been fighting for. That's what she wants to hear. And so I think a lot of what former President Biden had done in terms of the climate agenda and how Canada was reacting to that, a lot of trying to get through the negotiations with the Biden administration was about seeing how our sectors, our auto sector, would have to react to the changes that were being made there because of the integrated supply chain. So now I have this vision of Donald Trump coming in and kind of sticking his hand in and pulling the whole thing out, right? Like pulling the threads out. And then we'll have to respond to that. And so I think, at this point, again, with thankfulness that we don't hear anything about tariffs today, there's a lot of negotiation to keep happening about what sorts of steps Canada will take and how the relationship will evolve. But also, if the polls are right, of course the Liberals are in the middle of a leadership process right now. That will spit out a new prime minister before long. But if that person is not there for so long, and then there's an incoming potentially conservative government, how will those two partners play? Right, and that's going to be a very different world from the days of the Trudeau-Biden, and there being tension in that relationship about how to figure things out on climate policy and that integrated supply chain. But how will Trump and Elon Musk and the various governors get along with Danielle Smith, Pierre Poilievre? What sorts of openings will that create?
Rob, Lori brings up an interesting point, because when the message goes out to drill, baby, drill, of course, billions of dollars have been committed to companies like VW, Stellantis, to get the critical minerals and battery manufacturing up and running in this country. What type of economic rethink do you think this is going to require if the focus is no longer on EVs and going back to conventional engines?
Well, it's an example some of the impact that Mr. Trump had, perhaps even before getting into office. Look, there isn't a liberal leadership candidate, it seems, that isn't sprinting away from the carbon tax. Even though they've been telling us for almost a decade now that 80% of us were better off. I know that Mark Carney, somebody I interviewed about a year ago for The Economist, wasn't a big fan of investing in battery plants. His opinion was, if you wanted to actually help people into the energy transition, take a fraction of that amount of money and buy heat pumps and put those into places where you have oil furnaces now, and you're going to do a lot more for the energy transition. Bring home the benefits of the energy transition for those people at a fraction of the price. But I had to shake my head when I heard President Trump say that he was going to end electric vehicle subsidies and mandates. Sitting right behind him was Elon Musk, the largest producer of EVs in the world. And he has to know that that's going to affect the sales of his vehicles in the United States. Clearly, he has decided that there are other benefits to his $250 million investment in Mr. Trump. But it is a strange world and lends some credence to those who believe that the clock is ticking on the bromance between Mr. Musk and President Trump.